Deconverted Man here. I've got S.J. Thompson. How's it going? We're live now.
Hi.
Say something. There you go. Hi. All right. So we got a lot to catch up on. I'm just gonna dive in deep with all these things that you've been doing on Twitter and some things you've done on YouTube, and there's a lot to cover. So one of your big, huge tweet that you had, where you said that Christianity cures depression. So does Christianity cure depression? Do you still? What was that about?
Christianity can cure depression. If I clarified that tweet a little bit and said can cure depression, I think that would have helped.
Yeah, because you said Christianity does cure depression.
Yeah, and in some cases it doesn't cure depression. So I would say it's a possibility that it can cure depression for certain people in certain situations. But for other people in other situations, maybe it doesn't work. So
based on what psychological data?
Based on what psychological data?
Mm-hmm.
You mean, should I go collect data from psychologists to see if people who are Christian who claim to be cured via depression?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I haven't done that, Dan.
No, then why did you make the claim then?
I made the claim based on people that I know.
Okay, so a small sample of people that I know might have gotten cured by Christianity, but it could have been anything else for all I know. That could have been the post. Nobody would have tagged that.
That could have been, sure.
Yeah, I think that. So do you think it's better to say that instead of saying that Christianity can cure depression, that you believe that that's possible rather than saying it is a fact? Because one requires burden, the other doesn't.
Now, Dan, what you're doing here is you're actually adding information. I did not say it is a fact that Christianity cures depression. You're actually adding on to my tweet.
Your original tweet said Christianity cures depression.
And I know people whose depression has been cured.
Okay, but you know that that's been cured because of the Christianity.
Yes, they said because they found Jesus. Because they told me when they found Jesus that they felt a lot better about their lives. Okay, they lost a lot of the depressive symptoms that they had.
Did they get a psychological evaluation before, during, and after?
I didn't ask them that because I think that's a rather personal question, Dan. I wouldn't actually ask someone if they had a psychological...
You don't know that they actually had depression, nor do you know that it was cured by Christianity.
This is really... And I told you... I'm
holding your feet to... holding your feet to the fire. You're going to answer these questions.
No, I could just hang up because this is really...
If you want to be a coward.
No, this is honestly going into
Are you against biological evolution? We'll go to the next thing, because it seems like a lot of tweets you seem to be kind of starting to go against biological evolution. So, do you have any issues with biological evolution?
I have no issues with evolution. However, really? No, of course I don't have any issues with evolution. If we define evolution as merely the adjustment to our circumstances over time via adaptations, I have no problem with that. Of course not.
So what's that mean? Are you against what? That you don't think that we are apes, we are primates or something like that? Or
I think that we have a common ancestry with apes, and I don't have a problem with that. No.
Okay. Because one of your things seemed to be like, oh, we're not animals or something like that. It seemed like you were kind of going down that route of being against biological evolutions in your tweets.
No, I'm not against biological evolution. No.
A long time ago, you said that Satan lied, but I asked you where in the Bible. I still haven't gotten an answer to that. So where in the Bible does Satan lie?
Satan lied to Eve, basically said that she could become a god or become like God if she went and basically ate from the tree of good and evil. And so she ate from the tree of good and evil, and she didn't become like God. So Satan lied.
Well, like God being knowledgeable, I suppose you could look at it that way. I don't think that's a clear lie. But didn't God lie though too? Because he said they would die, and they didn't die.
Well, they immediately encountered a spiritual death, and then eventually encountered a physical death. And their bodies started in the decay process basically at that point, because at one point they were eternal, and then it turned into...
I have a question. Why was the tree of life in the garden if they had eternal bodies?
What are you going for? I'm not really sure what you're.
Well, there was a
say.
tree of life that God didn't want them to eat from, and if they weren't going to die, why was that tree there?
I'm not sure why that tree is there. Possibly as a part of a free will idea. So it's you have the will, you have the free option, just like we have free will to sin if we decide we want to sin.
But why would it?
So God put it's in my opinion, I think it's more of a symbolic sort of thing. The tree of life, just the word tree of life. It's the idea that they went against God's will. They didn't trust what God said, and so they decided to go against His will. And God has always given us that option. He even went back as far as to give Satan and his third of his army the option.
Is the tree, the tree of forbidden tree, is that one also symbolic, or is just the one tree symbolic?
No, I think that it's sort of a lot of the Bible has different sorts of messages that have a lot of interesting meanings. No, let me, Dan, if you want to keep interrupting me, I won't be able to finish any thought here. If you want to hear it, I'll answer it.
Yeah, I'd like to answer the original question.
Okay, so let me just explain this. When I say, for example, if you go into the Bible and you look at something like Noah's Ark, and you think about the Ark itself, and you realize the Ark actually has multiple meanings. The Ark could have the meaning where it's a physical ark, the actual boat, the gigantic boat, or it could have the meaning where it's something like a Christ-like sort of symbol. So if I look at the tree of life and the knowledge of good and evil and that kind of thing, I think a lot of that is symbolic and just telling us that we have the option to sin if we want to sin. We have free will. God put us here and gave us those options, and He gave them to Adam and Eve, and we saw what happened with original sin.
So are Adam and Eve symbolic, or the actual people?
I used to think they were symbolic, but I started to read a little bit of Hugh Ross's opinions on that, and I've changed my mind. I decided that I think they're probably literal figures, yes.
So then the trees, how can the trees be symbolic if they're actually, I mean, what
well, I think you can have symbolic stories or symbolic meanings within a literal story, so.
Kind of makes it muddy to figure out what's going on, though, doesn't it?
I think that the whole story to me is an absolute beautiful story that explains the beginnings of life and the options that humanity has always had. So,
but it doesn't really explain how life came about, not in any sort of meaningful way.
Yeah, that could be in your opinion if you don't think it's meaningful that our original sin is explained in that way.
Scientifically, I don't think it explains much of anything. And since I don't believe in sin, I don't really.
I don't think the Bible's to be taken as a scientific textbook. That's not its intention.
So you gotta. I think you've kind of answered where Satan lies. I'm not really sure. I'll give you a pass on that one, but okay. You had a lot of answers to your 5 questions you asked. You did more than one video, but at any rate, I answered 5 of the questions that atheists couldn't answer, and you got a lot of other answers as well. What was the follow-up to that? Did you make a video saying, hey, I was wrong, I got my answers? Or
no, I didn't get very good answers. In fact, I made a blog and I said I didn't get very good answers, basically. So I summarized some of the answers that I'd received, and I clarified exactly why the answers were not answering the basic issues. And so, for example, one of the issues that I've been discussing is exactly what led to the early disciples' bravery in the first few decades, and whether or not they actually believed what they said that they saw. They said they saw the risen Christ. And so I got answers that said that, well, martyrs today will commit suicide, or Muslims will commit suicide. But that didn't speak to the fact that Muslims never said they saw a risen Allah. And the early disciples physically said that they saw a risen Christ. So that is an issue I don't think has been addressed very well by atheists.
Well, there's a couple ways to address it. One is to ask a reductio ad absurdum question, like, well, how do you explain Luke Skywalker's bravery in the Empire Strikes Back?
Well, number one, I didn't watch that because I'm not into Star Wars. And number two, I think that's a red herring.
Well, it's an analogy. See, the thing is, we know that that's a work of fiction. And from the skeptical point of view, the Bible's a work of fiction. There's nothing in it that, except for a handful of cities and kings, that it can be corroborated through archaeology. So the rest of it might as well be complete made up whole cloth. So I don't even know that there was disciples to say anything at all in the first place. So there's no extrapolation to say, well, what would make them do this? I don't even think that they were there to do anything in the first place. So it's easy to write the story and make your characters do whatever you want. But if you're looking for a different explanation other than it just being all made up, which is a possible explanation, the fact is you would have to show that being tortured would get people to confess the truth when the opposite has been shown to be the case. Very few people ever actually say what the torturer wants them to say, or they'll lie and they'll make up things to get out of the torture. So the burden would be on you to show that martyrdom doesn't produce the consequence that you don't want to see. And you don't have those studies, you don't have anything to show that I'm aware of.
So here's what my claim is. So here's my claim. So the apostles said that in the year, they didn't physically say in the year 33, but we've estimated that it is in the year 33, where they were in some points, we had people like Peter who denied Jesus 3 times. He was very afraid of sharing his same fate. We had Paul, who was actually out there persecuting Christians, and he was involved in the murder of Stephen. And we have other disciples, such as James, who's Jesus' half-brother, who initially even tried to stop Jesus' ministry and thought that Jesus was crazy. And this kind of information, which is actually pretty embarrassing, is included in the Bible. And a lot of apologists think that embarrassing testimony actually speaks to the truth. But anyway, so we have those 3 examples, and then there are a bunch of other ones. But out of those 3 examples, we have backing that's extra biblical, that basically they were martyred. And we also have information about their change. And so the question is, what led to this amazing transformation with these people? They said it's because they saw a risen Christ, and they were willing to preach for him for decades. So either they didn't see a risen Christ and they were all completely crazy, or they saw the risen Christ as they said they saw the risen Christ. And they not only were preaching for decades, despite being jailed and stoned and hung upside down in Peter's case.
A lot of bad stuff. A lot of bad stuff supposedly happened to them. Another way to explain this, if you grant any of the story at all, which I don't, but if you were to tentatively grant this as being even possibly true, all it takes is one person to say that they saw the risen Christ. They don't need to have actually seen him. They just need to say that they saw him. And people will come to believe that that's true because groupthink is very strong, and also group mentality is a causal phenomenon. We've seen people, if they all face the back of the elevator and a new person comes in, they will most of the time look in the back of the elevator with everyone else because they want to be part of the group. So if you come into a group where most of the group is saying, we saw the risen Christ, you're more likely to say that you too saw the risen Christ, even if you didn't. And you're more likely to believe that as well. So
no, that would be lying. I don't think it makes it more. If people aren't more likely to create a lie,
but you don't know.
But Dan, it doesn't make any sense.
Psychological tests that have shown people will lie in groups as well. Like they'll do this test where they have 4 actors. They'll look at lines and they'll say, okay, line A is longest, line B is the longest, and so on. And then they'll start lying somewhere in the middle of the test, and the non-actor will start to go along with the wrong answers. And then you just eliminate the actors, you bring in new people, and before you know it, you have non-actors all lying about the results because they want to be in the group. They want to be part of the group. And when they're asked afterwards about the test, they'll say, well, I thought I was wrong and they knew better than I did. So it's not even a lie in their own head at that point because of how psychology works. These are simple psychological explanations to a story being told. It's a very powerful thing to have a bunch of people say, I saw X happen. But that doesn't mean X really did happen. It just means you want to be part of that group. Why do you think Heaven's Gate succeeded? And
so Dan, let me say a few things, because basically what you're saying then is all of the apostles lied. Is that what you're saying?
No, you didn't listen to a word I said.
No, you said that one of the apostles could have possibly seen the risen Jesus, and all of them basically took that word from that one person and went with it, and then started lying.
All you need is one. All you need is one.
But we have more than that, Dan.
Well, no, you don't have more than one. First of all, but I'm saying that even if you did,
this is really unpleasant.
Well,
you don't let me finish my sentences.
I'm holding your feet to the fire.
I want you to hold my feet to the fire, but I also would appreciate if you'd at least let me finish my sentences.
Well, I'm gonna have to stop you when I have additional information for you, and you're not considering it. This is why you rejected the answers that you got, is because you don't like those answers, not because they weren't good answers, but because they don't fit your narrative.
Okay, so here's what we have, Dan. So we have in 1 Corinthians 15.
I don't care.
Okay, well, let me just explain to the audience then. So we have in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul making the assertion that he and 12 other disciples...
Unless you can corroborate 1 Corinthians 15, it's irrelevant.
So again, Dan, just let me finish for a second.
No, the Bible's irrelevant. Prove the Bible without the Bible.
Okay, I will in a second, but first let me get to what 1 Corinthians 15. No. So Paul is making the assertion in 1 Corinthians 15 that he, the 12, and 500 other people witnessed the risen Christ.
You're not going to read the Bible on my YouTube. Not going to happen.
And they estimate that... No, listen for a second. They estimate that...
We're not reading the Bible on my channel. It's not happening. Okay?
They estimate that the 1 Corinthians 15 was written within 5 years of Jesus.
Who estimates?
Lots and lots of people, including...
Lots of people. You have any names?
Well, yes, Bart Ehrman is one of them.
Okay.
So I'm sure you'll take his...
No, not really, but do you have any other names?
I could... There's a lot of people who estimate that, and some of them are apologists, but I can even go back to Bart Ehrman, who's an agnostic, who also estimates that belief was basically something that was memorized in the early church. It was a creed, and it was published within 5 years.
But again, these are beliefs. And it doesn't take that long for beliefs to formulate. The Mormon church didn't take very long to get going. And that was made up on complete lie. So it doesn't take much for people to believe in lies. And you seem to have a problem with the idea that one person could make up a story or outright lie or whatever, and then everyone else can come to believe that. All you need is one person to make it up. Or one person hallucinates that Jesus was there. That's all that needs to happen. And they say, yeah, Jesus is there. Plenty of people responded with that possibility that you seem to reject out of hand.
So they estimate that Paul basically had his experience with Jesus on the road to Damascus within a few years of when Jesus died. So say that was around the year 36 or so, or maybe 38, something like that. Paul, for the next couple of decades, until the year 62, when he was beheaded by Nero, basically he was out there preaching. He endured jail, he endured stoning, he endured beatings. This was confirmed, since you said I couldn't say it in the Bible. The martyrdoms of Peter and Paul were documented by Dionysius of Corinth, Tertullian, and Origen. The martyrdom of James was also documented by Josephus, Hegesippus, and Clement of Alexandria. So there's some information outside of the Bible.
Okay, I'd have to look into that. Josephus, I'm going to be extra skeptical of, because we know there's been tamperings with that before. So with Paul, though, there's this assertion that he was persecuting Christians. Is there any documents that he was doing that, or is that just what he said he was doing? I know that we documented it, but you basically won't take outside of the Bible. What it says in the Bible. No, so if you won't take what it says in the Bible, evidence that Paul actually persecuted any Christians ever.
I don't know if there's extra biblical evidence. Actually, that's a good question, because I haven't looked into it. I do know that we have biblical evidence. Yeah, and I also know that Luke was somebody who took a lot of care when he wrote the book of Luke and he wrote the book of Acts. And Luke was somebody who initially, there was a person an archaeologist called William Ramsay. And last century, actually it was in the late 1800s, William Ramsay was not a Christian, and he set out to basically disprove the New Testament. And he went to the original site and started excavations and looking into things. And by the end, he actually converted to Christianity, and he was amazed by the historical accuracy that Luke had in his book of Acts. He was completely amazed. And so you won't take that as a serious testimony.
Well,
but
I'd have to look.
what,
I'd have to look into his. If you could type his name into the chat there, I'll look him out later and see if he is a legitimate archaeologist. If his findings were reviewed by any other archaeology team at all, or
you'll find he is actually. He's actually Sir William Ramsay, and it's spelled Ramsay. And so I'd encourage you to look him up.
We'll see. I'll do a video about him, and if I discover that he's not backed, I won't be too surprised. Oh my. But the thing, as I was going to say about Paul, it wouldn't really be the first time we've seen somebody claim to be against the church and then, oh, well, I was an atheist, and then I converted. It's like, yeah, it's a good story, but that's all it is. And even if we're to assume that he was constantly against Christians, if he was on some road somewhere, he could have had a heat stroke for all I know and thought that he saw Jesus or whatever and suddenly converted because he's around Christians all the time. And, he's making their lives hard. Maybe he suddenly has a guilt complex about it. Who knows? But, there's even an argument made about Paul and the vision that Paul had, that's why they cemented Jesus as a historical figure, because they wanted to stop people from saying that they saw Jesus in visions. So that before Paul, that people were thinking that Jesus was a celestial being, not a actual historical person. There's some argument for that made.
I've seen the argument for that, and I saw that argument from Richard Carrier, but I'd like to point out the fact that the apostles, over the first 40 days after Jesus had resurrected from the dead, they spent time with him. They actually sat down and ate fish with him. Thomas was doubting the situation. Jesus had Thomas touch him. So no, they didn't think that he was a celestial figure. They actually physically saw Jesus in the form he was, and Paul detailed exactly what that meant in the book of Corinthians, right after the passage of 1 Corinthians 15.
That's what the story says that they saw and did, but we don't have any idea that actually happened. And I was doubting Thomas, and I know about the poking the hole and with the holes in the hands and the stuff. Yeah, but I don't think even as doubting Thomas, I don't think I was doubting enough, because there would have been more questions I would have had. But I've been doubting Thomas, so I know about that. By the way, for those who have no idea, I was doubting Thomas in Satan Atheist video, so that's in my Satan Atheist playlist.
Wait, say that again. Your Satan? Is that like Satan Bruggencate?
No, Satan Atheist.
Satan? How do you spell that?
Atheist?
No. I know how you spell atheist. No, Satan. What's Satan?
Just like Satan Bruggencate. Same thing.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a whole playlist of videos I've done with Satan. He's a great guy. I don't know. He's still around. Seems like he's taking a big break. But I was doubting Thomas, so I got to do that. But the answer is you have to assume that the story is true, which there really isn't a very good reason to do that as a skeptic. As a believer, of course, you can make all sorts of ad hoc reasons, as you did, to think that it's true. But I just think it's simple to explain. All that has to happen is their leader just died. That's a traumatic event. How do we possibly make sense of this? And this one guy did a terrific video about it. I think he even responded to you with that video where he explains the psychology better than I could. I'll have to find that video again so I can put it in the description. But at any rate, the answers of psychology and groupthink and all this, they just kind of wash right over your head. And I think that, because if they didn't, that would hurt your belief.
I don't think they're good answers, actually. I don't think that they explain very well the fact that the people were willing to do what they did for decades. This wasn't just a temporary, hey, I had a vision and I'm going to go ahead and act on it, and I'm going to risk my life and be jailed and everything's going to depend on this. They actually spent decades preaching, even though many of them were persecuted in horrible ways.
But again,
we have evidence of the persecutions from outside the Bible. We have evidence inside the Bible.
And again, you make a big deal of the persecution. So what? People that have been tortured do not relent from their beliefs. That happens all the time. So what? Why is that a big deal? It's
because
not
if they believed in a lie, they could have easily said, you know what, forget this whole thing. I'm just going to go back to my comfortable life as a fisherman, and I'm going to go get out of this whole business. But instead, they actually went off.
The psychology is against that. It's kind of like you know that people, when there's been other psychological studies beyond the elevator experiment and the line experiment that I mentioned, and I'll link all that stuff below later. I wasn't thinking I was going to mention those. But there's one where scams, people have gotten involved into scams, and during the scam, they realize that they're paying all this money to this person and they're never going to get it back, but they keep paying money in because it's an investment. And it like there's this thing that happens psychologically where they keep putting effort and money into it, even though they kind of know that it's fake. And there's a whole psychological reason to this. I forget what the term is called.
Now, the term that you're referring to is called escalation of commitment. But an escalation, of course, so, I took high-level psychological courses. I think you probably know that, right? But let me give you a quote from a person called Charles Colson that I think is very fascinating. He says, I know the resurrection, listen to what he said for a second. I know the resurrection is a fact, and Watergate proved it to me. How? Because 12 men testified that they had seen Jesus raised from the dead. Then they proclaimed the truth.
Do you have
Dan, please, if you let me just finish this, please. Then they proclaimed the truth for 40 years, never once denying it. Everyone was beaten, tortured, stoned, and put in prison. They would not have endured that if it weren't true. Watergate embroiled 12 of the most powerful men in the world, and they couldn't have kept alive for 3 weeks. You're telling me that 12 apostles could keep alive for 40 years? Absolutely impossible.
First of all, I'd have to see that 12 people did give in, and that's a very small sample size because we have a very large sample size of people who don't give in under torture or martyrdom. So where's all the data for this? If it's true, then all you have to do is produce the psychological data that shows under torture, people will admit to a lie. Do you have that data?
I'm sure you could collect that from the government.
Do you have that data? No. Do you have that data?
Dan, I'm sure you could easily collect that information.
That's not the question.
No, I don't have that data.
Then your assertion is meaningless because you don't have the data to back up that martyrdom is meaningful in any way, shape, or form. And unless and until you provide that data, we have to be skeptical of your conclusion there. Okay, let's talk about the mock debate that you had. This was epic facepalm for me because that wasn't even a debate. You just asked questions. So what the bleep? Why did you even call it a debate? I just boggled my mind.
We were just having fun.
Yeah, but
are we allowed to do that, Dan?
You're allowed to do whatever you want, but
I mean, who cares?
You don't care that you called it something that it wasn't?
I called it a debate. I said something, they said something back. We had fun. It was a good time.
Question and answer. There was no debate there. You didn't challenge anybody's assertion. You didn't take the other side. You didn't.
I guess you didn't listen to the whole thing because I definitely challenged Andrew and I challenged Joshua a couple of times.
Not even barely. Like you were like, oh, let me ask another question, and that's all it was. It wasn't like what I'm doing to you, which is holding your feet to the fire and stopping you when you say something that's irrelevant to stay on track. By the way, you've avoided a number of questions, but I'll let the audience hear that for themselves. But yeah, I don't understand if you were planning on doing a mock debate, why not? You could have sent out everybody what the questions were going to be so people were ready for it. You could have actually taken the other side and actually argued that. So what I and Johnny decided to do, we're going to do our own mock debate, and I'm actually taking the theist side. So we'll show you how it's done when we get that ready to go. But I when it comes to debate, I take debate very seriously. I don't understand. I just don't understand it. I really don't. I was hoping for a better answer than it was just for fun, but because have you ever tried to actually argue for the atheist?
Hold on just 1 second. Yeah, I'm upstairs, honey. I'm sorry. Okay, say it again.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you'd ever actually tried to argue for the atheist side, and then a second to that question would be, I think I'd suggested to you somewhere that you pretend to be an atheist in a Christian chat room and see how that goes.
Okay, that's what I did. So,
you didn't really argue for the atheist side, though. Not really. You asked questions, so that's not an argument.
I asked questions that atheists typically ask me. So I just found some questions that I typically get asked by atheists, and I asked my Christian friends those questions and listened to their answers.
But that's not really a debate, though. I mean, I don't know. Do you have you ever tried to put yourself in the shoes of the skeptic? Not the skeptic is more important to me than just atheist, because there's more nuance there.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions. I have a lot of questions that I ask constantly about different aspects of the Bible, and that's why I've been so busy writing blogs, because I'll have a question. I'll say, hey, did Daniel 9 actually prophesy the date of Jesus's crucifixion? Is this true? So I actually went back to study Daniel 9, and I found out that, yes, actually he did. From the time of the Second Temple, that was 483 years, which Daniel basically said 7 sevens, 77s or whatever. And so he calculated it all out, less 7, and it turned out to land right on the year 33, which is pretty amazing. And Daniel actually also prophesied that this would occur before the fall of the Second Temple, and that actually occurred in AD 70. Daniel actually also prophesied that Israel would basically be brought back, and after about 2,000 years, yes, in 1948, Israel was revived, and people from all over the world returned, just as prophesied by Daniel. So every time I have a question and I get kind of skeptical about it, I'll go and I'll try to find the answer, and that was one that really opened my eyes to some pretty neat prophecies in the Bible.
The prophecy thing has problems that I don't think you looked into. Like, it needs to be very specific and not vague. The other question I had is, how do they know the person making the prophecy at the time? So let's say you're there with Daniel. You don't know the future. You're living with him, and he's saying all this stuff will happen. How do you know to record that stuff? How do you know he's a prophet in that moment?
I guess the early church fathers and the early Jewish church fathers decided that it was worthy of inclusion. In fact, if you go back and you look at the Jewish Tanakhs and the Jewish Pentateuch, you'll see that a lot of the things that are everything that's in our Old Testament is in their version. So,
not everything. And many things have been changed from the Torah into for the Old Testament.
Well, what's pretty neat, Dan, is we can actually find all of that evidence.
The Jews don't believe that Jesus fulfilled any of the prophecies. They would know best what prophecies are prophecies.
Oh, you can't label all the Jews, because there's a very specific sect called the Jews for Jesus.
Yeah, but
and they did determine that actually, in fact, the Jews for Jesus use Isaiah 53 as they go out and they march through Jerusalem quite often, and they share Isaiah 53 with their friends who realize, wait a second.
They're a very small sect. They're a very small sect. You have the majority of Jews that say, no, Jesus didn't fulfill any of the prophecies. He's not the one that we're looking for. They're looking for a very different Messiah, and it wasn't Jesus. So,
I just did a video because I know you just made the claim that the Old Testament, the Jewish version of the Old Testament is quite different. But
the Torah is very different, yeah.
But I just did a blog on that topic, and I looked at the Dead Sea Scrolls. And actually what's pretty neat is the Dead Sea Scrolls preserved the book of Isaiah completely, like 60 different copies of the book of Isaiah, all this kind of stuff. We actually have something that was around from before Jesus's time that actually completely points to Jesus. So in my blog, I basically made the case that if we even only had the Old Testament, we have enough evidence of Jesus just from that alone. And so that's what's amazing. Christ is actually throughout the Old Testament.
It's also very easy to write the story after the fact and make it match all the things that were said to come true and say, oh yeah, and then he did that thing that somebody said was going to happen. And
so what's the incentive? What was the incentive for the apostles and the disciples to do that, Dan? What was their incentive to make something up?
They weren't the ones that wrote it.
What was the incentive of the disciples? You admit that Paul wrote.
They weren't the ones that wrote it.
Well, I don't make that claim. I say they are. The gospel attributed to Matthew is to Matthew the tax collector. The gospel attributed to Mark is a good friend of Peter.
Even if they were
the gospel, according to Luke actually traveled with Paul, and he documented his travel starting in Acts 16. So if you go into Acts 16, you're going to see he starts referring to himself in the we form. And Paul wrote all of the epistles. Paul wrote up to 12 books in the New Testament. So yes, we do have people who were eyewitnesses who made the claims who also wrote the book.
And even if they were eyewitness testimony is very weak. We don't have their writings. Those are gone, even if they wrote anything. What we have are copies of copies. And so there's nothing to prevent, especially because the tradition was to burn the old copy when you wrote down the new one. So we don't have the old stuff to check. All we have is whatever the oldest one we have is, and we have fragments of that at best. And there's
so we do. You do know that
there's nothing to stop the person that penned that down to change things to suit their narrative. Nothing at all. And there's tons of incentive for whoever that anonymous person that does that to do that.
Okay, so I'm actually in this book here by Sean and Josh McDowell. And actually, I'm on the page with the number of biblical transcripts. And now we do know that, for example, we've got a fragment of John that goes back to 125. And that's one date that they estimate, or before. Some actually
John was alive in 125?
No, it's a fragment from his writings that survived, and they dated that fragment back to about 125.
Okay, so was John alive
between 90 and 125?
So did John sign that? How do we know it's from John?
It's a fragment that's out of the book of John, because the words on the fragment are matched up to the book of John.
Who wrote it?
So we know that could either be John, if it actually was something that went back to 90, or it could have been a copy of John's book, basically.
Yeah, and if it's a copy, that's the problem right there. You understand that, right?
No, I don't. I don't think that a copy of a book is. We've already got. I've already given you proof. No, but Dan, I've already given you
the original. We know that we don't have the original at all. We know that.
Dan, I've already given you proof that
no, you didn't give
people. No, I've given you proof that the people in those times were very inclined to want to tell the truth.
No, and they weren't. There's no proof of that at all.
Well, yeah, I gave you that with the Dead Sea Scrolls and the way that those tie in completely with what we see today in the Old Testament.
But they actually don't. There's many problems with those as well. That've already been these so-called prophecies have been refuted multiple times by multiple people, and it. As I said, the Jews don't agree, so I'm more likely to take their word than I am the Christian word for it. And the Torah has different things than the Old Testament has. The Old Testament has at least one verse that was rewritten from the Torah to match with what Jesus supposedly did later. So these are stories. They're copies. They're not originals. There's no way to verify them. There's a lot of things. People call them Q and R, and we don't know who wrote them. And there's nothing to stop somebody from penning in something that they want to be there. Nothing at all.
Okay, so I've got on this page 64 right here, I want to give you a reference. On page 64, I've got a number of church father writers who use citations directly from the Gospels and from the other testaments. We've got Justin Martyr, basically has citations of 268 citations from the Gospels, 10 from Acts, 10
and those Gospels were copies, right? Those are all copies, right? 6
from the general epistles. Okay, then we've got Irenaeus. He has 1,038 citations from the Gospels.
Were those Gospels copies?
We have Alexander of Clement, and he has 1,107.
Were the Gospels copies? Were they copies, or were they the original? Were they the original or not? That's all.
These people were around in the 2nd century, Dan. So
did they have the original? Then they had the original.
They might have had the original.
They might have had. Okay, so we don't know.
Likely.
Okay. All right.
So
highly likely based on what exactly?
Dan, this is getting annoying. You interrupt more than other people I've chatted with ever on these kind of talks.
You can always block me like you have several other people. I don't
really care. I blocked 200.
Oh.
Origen, he's got 9,231 citations.
Unless they have verified originals, I don't care.
Tertullian has
I don't
3,822.
care. I don't care unless they have
Hippolytus
original.
has
It doesn't matter
734.
unless it's the original.
And the
I don't
last one I'm
care.
going
It
to name
doesn't
is
matter.
Eusebius has
Okay.
3,268 citations
They're
from
like
the
a
Gospels.
one-trick pony. Okay, I wrote you a big, long Google Drive document in response to your health and Christianity blog post that you made quite some time ago. I've given you that link a couple different times. I don't know if you've ever looked at it. You certainly haven't responded to it. It kind of goes along the same problem that you had with your Christianity cures depression thing. But in this blog post, you were saying that Christianity makes people more healthy.
And actually, no, that's not what the blog post says. The blog post is called Health Correlates of Religiosity and Atheism. And I actually have a copy of it right here. So I basically, what I did was I took a lot of meta-analytic studies, and I actually summarized some of the results of the meta-analytic studies. And some atheists have actually gone in there and double-checked me on this and found that I wasn't misciting anything. I actually just listed information as what it was. And so I was able to find things like suicide rates are lower in religious countries than in secular countries. There's a bunch of things. People who are depressed find that the religiously unaffiliated had significantly more lifetime suicide attempts in their first degree relatives who had committed suicide. And more first degree relatives who had committed suicide than subjects who had endorsed a religious affiliation. So I found information on depression, suicide, a lot of that kind of stuff. And it basically said that it's a pretty positive outcome for being religious. Now, I didn't say the Christian faith, because this actually includes people of different Christian different faiths.
I granted that you actually had citations for the health and religion, but what I took issue with was a number of other things that you had. You had proved me wrong on the relationship between health and non-belief in God. Of course, that's shifting the burden of proof. You shouldn't make statements like that. You should really do better than that. But there's also, it seems you left out the fact that some religiosity can lead to very negative health consequences, like people believing if they blow themselves up, that's a good thing. So, and then you also didn't cover the things that could lead to healthy life, but aren't religious at all. This wasn't a meta-analysis. It was only focusing on religion. So the nebulous question of what if X, Y, and Z also have the same or better health effects than religion does went unanswered. So it was kind of like, yeah, okay, religion can help you, but maybe so can going to musical concerts every week. I don't know. There was nothing there. So it was very narrow in scope. And
let me give you one of the studies here. So there's a study by Smith, McCullough, and Pohl in 2003. It says positive religious coping, positive God concepts, and intrinsic religious motivation were negatively associated with depressive symptoms. In other words, people who fell back on their religion to cope with events and who sincerely believe that religion is an active, directive force in their lives showed there fewer symptoms of depression. So actually, I'm glad you reminded me of this study because I forgot it initially in our call. So this actually completely speaks to when I said that Christianity can help depression.
Well, religiosity, you've shown has some positive influence on health, which I said I granted tentatively at any rate, but that doesn't tell us about all the other things that are out there in life that could also help our health.
And I'm not saying there aren't. Biking, I love bike riding. I ride my bike every day. That certainly helps my health.
Right, and if you had read my document, and I still don't know if you did or didn't.
I don't think I did, to be honest.
Yeah. Because, well, if you had read it, I would imagine you would have responded with a blog post and let me know or something. But
if you send it to me, I'll read it. I apologize for not reading it. Maybe I get busy sometimes, and I do get a lot of atheists writing response video or blogs and response videos, and a lot of times I just don't have the time. So, but I have a break now. I'm actually in the break for a while. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the main thing was if you're out to, I don't know, prove that religion is good for your health, let's say, that's fine, but I would want like a meta-analysis to show that it's better than anything else, or that it's as good as everything else. Something, whatever is the truth, whatever the fact is, that's what I would like to know. And then it would be very interesting. But of course, then there would be this weird problem of, of what religion I could possibly grab onto to help with my health, then, I don't believe any of them. So it's like, even if it was useful, I was like, well, I can't believe in something just to make me feel better. So it's kind of weird. It'd be a weird thing if it was if that came out to be true. Let's say if religion was, well, maybe Buddhism, maybe that could be it. I don't know.
Yeah, there's different, and actually they have, I mean, there's a study here with Christian Jews and Muslims. They were in a study of youths and adults, and they found that the Christian Jews and Muslims in those studies basically scored higher on measures of, who scored higher in measures of religiosity. They're more likely to see their dentist, take their vitamins, and wear their seatbelts, and less likely to drink and smoke than their less religious counterparts. So that's studies by people like Wallace and Foreman, 1998, Hill and colleagues, Islam and Johnson, Shmeli and Tamir. So there's a number of different authors who've published these same kind of studies. And,
I said the study and all that. I commended you on that, because that's good. You actually had some stuff, but of course there is some counter examples, like with Jehovah's Witnesses. They actually have a very high rate of suicide, and they're trying to figure out why that's going on. There's a question of, well, maybe it's because the religion says one thing, and now that the youth have access to the internet, that they're learning what their religion says is false, so they're killing themselves because of that. They don't really know. They're trying to sort it out. So, and again, it would be one of these things where, let's say you did the meta-analysis or had somebody do it, and you discovered that religion was as good as anything else that we can do for our health. That would be interesting. I wouldn't surprise me. To show that it was better, that would be interesting too. But even if you had something that showed that it was better, that still would be difficult in terms of not making it true. It'd just be like, okay, it's a benefit if we engage in religious like practices. And then the question would be, are we better off with a religion that practices with a spiritual God, or just like the atheist churches that exist, or, what does it have to do to get us to this health benefit would be another part of that study. So there's a lot of questions that are unanswered there.
Dan, are you familiar with statistics?
Yes.
Are you familiar with when they call it variance explained?
Yeah.
Okay, so how does that relate to exactly what you're saying with respect to using other variables in an analysis, in the regression analysis?
Well, the meta-analysis would cover.
Well, a meta-analysis basically just looks at effect sizes by comparing comparable studies.
Well, and other things that can affect your health, because there's more than just religion. There's other things that you can do that would make you feel better as a human and probably have a better quality of life. Like just being around people can help you feel better about yourself.
Right, I never would make the claim that those aren't also variables that could be predictive of healthy outcomes. Right, I'm definitely not saying that.
No. And what I'm getting at is, I'm not sure what the argument being made is. It's like, well, it's interesting to know that religion can help people, but what's more interesting would be to know if it can help people better or the same as anything else, any other activity that's out there. And that's the question that's unanswered.
Well, I think what you would want to do, if you want to figure out something like that, and there's a very easy way to calculate that out. So what you would do is you'd compile all of the variables in someone's lifestyle. And so you could look at things like church attendance, religiosity, spirituality, seeking purpose and meaning, those kind of things. And you could take other things, family life, divorce rates, all kinds of different things. You could look at marital status. You could look at number of children. I've actually looked at studies on this kind of stuff and looked at predictors of happiness. And I actually took data from the World Values Survey. So I put all of these variables together. And then what we do is run a regression analysis. And so in a regression analysis, you'll see which variables have the strongest correlation to the outcome variable. And so I would see what are the best predictors of happiness. And so I'd have all of these different variables into it, and then see which ones are the strongest, which are the weakest, which aren't even statistically significant. And so by using an analysis like that, you can see exactly where religiosity stands with respect to a number of other control variables and just regular variables in the analysis.
Yeah, well, you like I said, that would be something interesting that you could provide if the argument is that religion is better than anything else, or at least as good as anything else, and so that's what I would love to see you do or somebody do.
Yeah, and I can actually, to be honest, I'm working on that. I was just about to run statistics on that exact same thing. I actually received a Dana grant 2 summers ago that I haven't been able to fulfill yet, running data. And unfortunately, my statistical package expired, so I'm waiting for my school to get me the new version of it so I can run that, because I have really good data from the World Values Surveys that I collected, and actually has a lot of those different kind of variables that you're describing. We even have things like political affiliation. There's lots of different variables. So it's a fascinating data set. And so I'm trying to get that moving forward now that I have time. So
yeah, and then there, like I said, there'd be so many more questions, because if we came to this, let's just say that, for the sake of argument, we found out that religiosity, whatever that means, is very beneficial to health. Well, then, okay, we would have to figure out what aspects of it are the best at producing health for the most amount of people, and then see if we can copy that and how to do that, and then how to live that way, because I think that there's a confusion between religious and spiritual and God, because you can have the trappings of religion without any of the spiritual God, whatever stuff, which certainly the atheist churches seem to be trying to do that. I don't know how successful they are, and I don't know how they've been around a while, but I don't know if there are enough of them to be included in these studies, because I would think that data point would be relatively small, but it certainly would be interesting to include them in the studies if possible, because I would imagine that since they're mimicking religion, you would see a similar trend if it's true, unless there is a difference between religions with a god and without a god, and then you would have to go to, like, I don't know, Buddhism or Jainism or one of the other, whatever doesn't really have God per se in it, that's out there that's still a religion.
No, I think you're making a good point, and the point here is that there are different aspects of being religious that are important to note. One of them is, are you searching for higher meaning and purpose? These are distinguished actually in the World Value Survey. So one of them is, do you believe in God? Do you not believe in God? Do you feel a sense of community in your church? If you speak to the atheist, people going to maybe a unity, what are they like? Atheists go to what's that church? There is a church that I know.
This
Universalist, is
First
it? Or?
Sunday Assembly, I know, is one.
Yeah, there's a couple of them.
Yeah.
But you would find, and you're right, it'd be interesting to survey people in those churches, because there is a benefit to a sense of belonging and community.
Yeah.
So they would get that benefit.
Yeah. Well, again, I'd want all the data before I was, convinced, because I'm, jaded. But so we'll have some questions in chat here, since I ran out of my questions, and I didn't want to, I put your feet to the fire, and you got burned a little and got a little bit irritated, but you survived somehow. Badger said I was being too hard on you. Well, that might very well be the case. Well. Let's see. I know I saw a question mark. I know I did. Badger's badgering me. I know. Let's see.
Now, Snuffy, I turned it over so I can see what's actually over there. I see Snuffy Wuffikus says, I always read a study, or there is a paper. So I'm going to post, if Dan, if you don't mind, can I post a link to my blog that has lists of all the studies that I've been talking about today with religiosity?
Yeah, certainly. Let me go ahead and give you, or you're not showing up in my chat. So if you're not there, I can't give you a wrench, but don't forget to mute it. We'll have horrible feedback. There we go. Okay. Now I can make you a thingy. There we are. Okay, now you can post link. It'd be funny if SJ was just like, everybody's banned! Rah! This will get you, atheist! Rah! She's not that kind of person. It would be funny, though.
No, I try to be nice. Sometimes I don't come across that way, but I really do try.
Yeah, Badger, you deal with SJ next time. You'll probably do better than I did. I cut off people when, and I still need to practice interview more, I think.
Let me ask you that. I see Greg Natesy here. I want to make a clarification. One time I said something like it was a complete hyperbole. I was speaking of myself when I was riding a bike and how I was sort of blown away by something that God. I had a feeling or an experience that I felt was very spiritual at that point. I didn't literally fall off my bike. In fact, it's been so long since I've literally fallen off my bike, and I did it because I actually crashed into somebody once, and this is years and years ago. But no, I didn't literally fall off my bike. So please stop with saying that. It's just really annoying.
Okay, I don't know what that's in reference to, but yeah, I know I saw a question mark. Okay, people in chat ask questions because I don't know where it went. Hi, Ella Ninja. I have no idea who that is. Hi, though. Apparently, you know who I am. So, so yeah, okay. Snuffy, just right to the core of it. Wanting you to show that your God exists in a real way, and what I think he means by that is what I usually require, which is empirical evidence, repeatable test, or a valid and sound argument. And so far, these criteria haven't been met in regards to any God claim. So is there empirical evidence for God?
Is there empirical evidence for God? Well, let me tell you how we could get that evidence. And I've been toying around doing this idea, but there's something called subjective content analysis. And so if we were to collect the testimonies from a number of different Christians, and we could collect them from people in different faiths, Muslims, people from Buddhist faiths, or people from Hindu faiths, that kind of thing, we could actually look for themes in that, and we could do a subjective content analysis. And that actually would be empirical. So there are ways to conduct empirical analyses that could be pretty interesting. Okay. Now, actually, you know what that goes back to, though? Another thing I'd like to point to is a book by J. Warner Wallace called Cold Case Christianity, because he actually went and investigated the whole Jesus story when he was an atheist, and he came to the conclusion that the best explanation for all of the information that was out there was that Jesus resurrected.
Okay, I'll just okay, scroll up a little. I asked a question, frustrated, so let's see, where was it? You just copy and paste it. I can't find it. But what I meant by empirical evidence was visible phenomenon.
I got a great answer for you. I've got a great answer for you. If you were to find out that all of the people in the world from various sects, whether it was from humanists, atheists, or it was from different religions all around the world, if you were to find out that everyone seemed to have the highest understanding or the strongest value of what they ought to do was to be benevolent and universalist, would that point to the existence of a supreme moral lawgiver?
No.
Because that's actually the truth. There's a study by Shalom Schwartz, and I mentioned this in my other chats, but basically Shalom Schwartz found in 2012, and he was astonishing to him. He said values vary around the world, but people have the same moral codes of what they ought to do, pointing to benevolence and universalism being the two strongest. It was pretty astonishing, he said, right in his conclusion.
It's not really that astonishing, and it doesn't point to anything other than that humans have common ethical and or moral grounds. It's not really surprising. And the reason is again, evolution. With societies that didn't have those sort of moral groundings didn't last, so they're not around anymore. And now Islam, unfortunately, is here despite not having a very good moral grounding. But it seems unclear of how long they'll survive that, so we'll see, I suppose.
I'm hoping. Have you ever listened to David Wood?
But don't you understand that it would make sense on an evolutionary standpoint for the good morals to survive and the bad ones to die off, with the civilizations that died because they couldn't survive using those morals?
Actually, I have to say something about Muslims. I have a number of Muslim coworkers and lots of Muslim students, and many of them have very, very good morals. So I don't want to say that I don't think that it's right or fair to make an assertion that the entire Muslim population of 1.6 billion people is immoral. I don't think that's right.
I'm not worried about the good ones. I'm worried about the bad ones. But I asked a question, and the question was that don't you see the evolutionary advantage of good morals winning out over bad ones? Bad morals wouldn't allow a society to thrive and continue, and so that society would die out. And the good morals.
I think that's a good theory, but we can see that a lot of people have bad morals in societies, and we definitely see that evolution can also speak to selfishness.
Sure, but selfishness.
And look at someone like a Donald Trump. How does Donald Trump get into office?
Selfishness is something that might be necessary for survival. So of course it would survive, and evolution doesn't always weed out everything, but that kind of it. You said it's a good theory. That's where you're going to leave it?
I think that your theory is that, yes, these societies may have died out. And I'm sure that there are certain instances where they did. For example, the Canaanites, who had very horrible values and were burning their children to Baal, they died out. So, for the most part, there's some Canaanite people left, but that, as a society, that society pretty much diminished. So.
Well, I was thinking of like Mayans and stuff like this. Anybody that had any sort of human sacrifice doesn't seem that their society was able to live very long. I mean, they lasted a while, don't get me wrong, but ultimately they didn't work. It didn't continue to function. And so it seems to me that the commonality of morals that we have after however long we've been Homo sapiens and before that, because who knows what, the primates had for their morality, but through the course of time, it doesn't surprise me at all that we have very common morals after all this time. And it doesn't point to anything other than humans having morals. That's all it points to. And it doesn't address the question, which I said, is there visual, let me rephrase it, is there visual evidence of God? Because by empirical evidence, I meant visual evidence.
Is there visual evidence of love?
Is there visual evidence of God is the question.
No, I know. I'm asking you back. Is there visual evidence of love?
I'll answer the question after you answer mine. Is there visual evidence of God?
Well, I would say just like we don't have exact visual evidence of the concept of love. We certainly have visual evidence of the outcomes of love, just like we might not have visual evidence of God himself, but we certainly have visual evidence of the outcomes of what God produces.
The answer is no, we don't have visual evidence. Would that be fair?
Well, I don't have Jesus standing right next to me where I can actually say, here you go, Dan, here's Jesus here.
Would it be fair to say that the answer is no then, right?
Well, let's look at the answer. I don't have visual evidence of God. Yes, I said that. But I also, but Dan, I also want to say we don't have visual evidence of concepts. We don't have visual evidence of state borders. We don't walk between, besides a sign at the state saying welcome to Florida. I don't have visual evidence that basically this is a border unless someone's put a fence up. Yeah. So there's a lot of different things that we don't have visual evidence of.
Yeah, I agree that concepts in the mind that do not exist anywhere but the mind tend to not have visual evidence of them. Is there a repeatable test that we could perform on God?
Is there a repeatable test you can perform on history?
Is there a repeatable test that we can perform on God?
Okay, so I'm making the claim that Abraham Lincoln did something a while back.
Can you answer the question?
Can I repeat this item in history?
An answer to the question would be preferable to you asking me a question.
Well, I'm just trying to help our audience also understand that some of these questions are not legitimate.
This is a perfectly legitimate question. Is there a repeatable test that we can perform on God? Yes or no?
God is metaphysical, so using physical boundaries, no, that doesn't apply. Okay. It's basically you're talking about something that's a category error.
All right. So you say, does God change?
No, God doesn't change.
Okay, there's a test that was performed on God in the Bible, God versus Baal. Why can't we do that test again?
Why can't we run history again? Why can't we have watched Jesus on the cross again?
You said that God doesn't change, right?
God doesn't change.
Okay. God allowed us to test it, God versus Baal. If God doesn't change, then we should be able to do that same test and have the same results. So why can't we run that test?
I don't think this is a very good argument, Dan. I think we should probably move on.
The answer may be because God does change, or that...
No, I told you God doesn't change.
Okay, so then why can't we run that test today? What would
why can't you run a test to prove something in history, Dan?
That's not the question.
No, but that's actually, it speaks very well to it.
If you can't test, red herring and it's irrelevant, and you know it.
Well, that's what you're giving me is red herring questions.
No, it's a very fair question. If God doesn't change, and God allowed us to test it in the Bible, God versus Baal, then we should be able to run that test again. Yet, I think I would assume, I would guess, because I don't know. I'm not, you know what? Let me undo that. I don't know what you know. Let me just say that. I know that if we ran that test, absolutely nothing would happen. What do you think would happen if we ran that test?
I don't know the Bible verse that you're referring to with Baal, but if you want to, if you want to give me the Bible verse where you can.
Well, I don't know the Bible verse offhand, but the story is basically they have a fight between the Baal believers and Yahweh believers, and they march around praying to Baal for Baal to set their sacrifice on fire, and nothing happens, and then they pour water on the sacrificial altar for Yahweh, and they say, "Hey, Yahweh, make this go," and boom, it's on fire, like instantly. One prayer, that was it.
Oh, I do remember that. Okay, yeah. So
that would be
so
pretty.
You're saying, why can't we do that again?
Yeah, if God doesn't change, meaning that God's the same, He was okay with us doing that then, therefore He should be okay with us doing that now. But I suspect if we ran that test, nothing would happen. Neither one would go up in flames. It just wouldn't happen.
It'd be interesting to test it. Let me
kind of know what would happen, though, don't you? I mean, you kind of have a guess that nothing would happen, right? I mean,
no, I actually wouldn't say that. God's actually shown small miracles in my life on a daily basis.
So if I do it in my house and nothing happens, what then? How many people have to do it before that becomes a compelling argument that either God changes or we can't test God? One of the two would have to be true.
No, it's not that God changes. What you're trying to say is not that God changes. What you're saying is God, basically, the cultures have changed, and God gave people different levels of evidence in different times.
Well, we need more evidence now than they did back then. So I don't think God's given us the evidence that we would require. Okay, my last one. So the answer was no to that one, by the way. The last one.
No. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that it's possible that if you did do something like that today, it's possible it could happen. So I'm not saying that it definitely is not going to happen.
I absolutely know that nothing would happen, and I'll do it. But the last one, of course, is a valid and sound argument. And so far, I haven't heard anything for any God concept that qualifies as that. So we've had no to the first two questions after some runaround. So possibly you have a valid and sound argument for God, whatever that is. What would that argument be?
Well, there's a lot of different arguments for God, Dan, but I think the strongest one is just looking at Jesus' resurrection. So
that's one that I have to first assume that there was a Jesus, then assume that the story is true to any degree, then assume that he actually came back from the dead, then assume that means that there's a God, because for all I know, Jesus could be a Wolverine. Maybe he's the one human that had super regenerative powers or something, for all I know. So just coming back from the dead doesn't actually prove God, nor would it prove that Jesus is God as well as being the Son of God. So there's a lot there, but I can't verify any of it, so it's not really a logically valid argument.
Well, we did talk about this at the beginning of the thing, so I won't go back down that path, but.
So I'm not going to read that, Scorsifer. I know somebody asked a question, and I did. Does God wear clothes? Spooky bed hair. Does God wear clothes? No. I mean, I guess. Well, see that's weird because some parts of the Bible, God is very anthropomorphic and has a heart and a face and a behind, but other times it's not. So I don't know. Is God naked? Yeah.
C.S. Lewis has an interesting take on that. He thinks that God and spirits and angelic figures all have wear something that's kind of like clothes, but actually it's part of their whole form. So it's in his book Mere Christianity, and I don't recall exactly how he put it, but it was really interesting. So that could be a theory.
No.
I think until we find the answer to that, I think it's silly to even speculate.
Yeah. Frustrated Atheist's question was about whether the religious people who are miserable in marriage due to spousal abuse, etc., if the studies also included those people into the equations.
I don't know. I don't know if they. I don't know if they. I would doubt that they probably went down the road where they were looking at abuse situations in those studies. So usually you don't.
Because it would be kind of, you'd want to show the positives as well as the negatives for it to be, just to see what, the pros and cons of being religious, broadly speaking.
So yeah, so we did talk about,
but we don't know if they're
if they controlled for abuse situations. Now it's an interesting question, and I don't know whether or not the particular studies I pulled had those control variables. I feel like they probably did not. So that's just what I can say there.
Okay. Johnny Drive-By asked, why does God send so many confusing messengers or messages?
Why does God send so many confusing messages? Well, I think that's kind of a leading question because it's assumed. I think he's sent rather pretty easy to understand message just by looking at the example of Jesus. Well, and I think we have a lot of people who misrepresent Jesus. We have a lot of people who aren't terribly good Christians. I mean, there are people on both sides of the table who are kind of mean people, but so that's a pretty bad deal. So if we wanted to figure out exactly what Jesus would do in a situation, and if we tried to act like him, that would be about as easy as it could get. I mean, it wouldn't be easy to act like him. It's not at all, but it would be. What I'm trying to say is that just looking to his example, to me, is a pretty easy answer to that question.
That's just, you got to look from the skeptical point. Looking in is we're confronted with about 14,000 doors to choose from, and we're like, they all look the same to us. Those 14,000 doors being the 14,000 some odd religions there are to choose from. And so you're just looking at the Jesus claim. We've got all these other claims to consider, and we don't know which of them might have come from God. So I think that's what Johnny was trying to get at.
There are a lot of people in the world who basically feel that God is not a personal a person or a personal experience that one can have. You can't have a personal experience with God. There are people who are in different faiths within the Hindu faiths and within the Buddhist faiths who basically feel that God is beyond us. He's immanent in the world. He's not transcendent. He basically is a part of the world. And in fact, I've talked to some Hindus, and they've thought that they compare God to sort of like an electric current in your house, where it's a passive situation. And but I think from our own personal experiences, I think that we can find that God is very active and personal. And so just by looking at that, we're able to eliminate a couple of major world religions. And then you can speak to, well, now let's look at, say, Judaism, Muslim faith, the Muslim faith, and Christianity, because I'm saying now that God is personal. I'll look at those three faiths and I'll see which one of those stands up to what we see out there, what makes sense. And when I read the Old Testament, it completely, to me, points to the New Testament. I see many cases the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament, for example, which is Jesus. And so there's a lot of that kind of really great stuff. And so I think that Christianity makes the most sense. Allah's transcendent and aloof. And so that's why I would say that also Allah does not follow the experience that I've had.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know if you're. I mean, I think that that's the only. I think that that's your answer. I don't know that we can dive in deeper into that question because it would be extremely hard, I would think, for you to see from the outside in that for us skeptical atheist people, broadly speaking, one religion is we can't just eliminate religions like you said. All the God claims that are out there are from people. And so you get into this personal experience territory, and we have psychological explanations for those sort of experiences. And there's no way to differentiate between a legitimate experience, if there is such a thing, and one that's caused by natural phenomenon. There's a thing called the God helmet, this experiment that they've done that uses magnetics to interfere with the brain a bit. And the people that have done this have reported experiencing God. Now, some of them haven't, and those people never experience God because their brain can't experience that experience, which would lead into more questions if God really existed, but less if evolution is true, because that would make perfect sense. But at any rate, the question that I would have is, even if I had an experience of God right now, would be, how do I know it's not a giant magnet passing by my house? There's no way to eliminate the natural possibility when there's plenty of possible natural possibilities. So I think Johnny was trying to say we need a clear, coherent message, like a voice from above in every language telling us, hey, this is how I work, or something like that. That would be pretty convincing.
I think the Bible itself is a very convincing message, and it gives lots of God's words. Seriously.
Let's see. I'm trying to find. Oh, did you mention David Wood?
Yes, I did.
Okay, you're talking about the same David Wood that was the sociopath guy?
That's the one. Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. And he did what again?
The reason I brought him up is because I brought him up for two reasons. One is because I sent a tweet out and he said he's willing to come on my YouTube channel at some point. So I'm super excited about that, but he hasn't emailed me yet. So I don't know if this is actually going to happen. So, but the other reason I brought him up is because he actually does a lot of videos on Christianity versus Muslims. And he actually gets a lot of attention from Muslims, and his stuff is pretty fascinating. He's studied up on the Islam faith, and he's learned a lot about it. And he goes in and he battles people, and it's really funny to watch. I enjoy it.
Well, I mean, that would be a case where I definitely would say the argument must be separate from the person, because people definitely might have some moral, ethical objections to the fact that he's a sociopath. But I would just say, analyze the arguments, whatever they might be. Let's set aside the fact that he may or may not have apparently smashed his dad with a hammer. I don't know what he did or didn't do.
Oh, no, he did that.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, he was an atheist for many years, and when he was in his teens, he actually. So he claims. But he's a sociopath too, and so when he was in his teens, he basically did that to his father. He ended up going to prison, and when he was in prison, he kept challenging another prisoner who was a Christian on certain Bible verses and things like that, because he felt like the Christian was totally off. He even starved himself for 40 days trying to beat Jesus. He did all kinds of things that he until one day he just sort of saw the light. So.
Sociopaths do lie. So, I would just look at the argument independent of whatever he claims, because that's all that would matter. Scorsifer wanted to know what your biblical education is. I think that's a pretty long answer.
My biblical education, I'm self-educated in the Bible.
Okay.
So
there you go.
I have a lot of books. I've actually let me answer Scorsifer. I have a ton of books that I've bought in the past couple of years. I could take pictures of them and send them to people if they care to see what they are. But what I did is I looked at different Christian apologetics syllabi that were out there from the Southern Evangelical Seminary that I could find, and from Biola. And I identified the textbooks or the other books that were required in those courses. And so I just ordered those to sort of self-teach myself and try to get myself up to speed. So.
Okay. And then you didn't, or maybe you did and I missed it. Can you go? I gave you the thing so you could post your blog. Now I don't remember what that was in regards to now.
I will. Oh, you gave me a screw. Look at that. Hi.
Yeah, I did. That's what I said. Yeah, I gave you the little wrench thingy.
Yeah, thanks.
Screw, wrench, whatever.
Yeah, wrench. I'm wrong. Thanks for correcting me.
Screw, wrench, whatever. I don't know. Well, they might as well make it a screw.
Hey, Craig.
YouTube's been screwing over people.
Yeah, I've been hearing about that. I heard even Patreon's been screwing over people.
Yeah, Patreon got woke and went broke hardcore, and they're gonna regret what they're doing here.
Craig Reed wants to know why he doesn't have a wrench.
Because she needs to post her thing. As soon as she posts her thing, the wrench goes away.
Oh, that's how it happens. Okay, well, hold on. Let me go find my blog. I have a temporary wrench. I don't even have.
You can't post links without a wrench. Like, here's your wrench.
Oh boy. Okay.
Only Johnny keeps his wrench forever and all time because.
Wow, he's a tough crowd here. Okay, here's my religiosity and
just raw. Frustrated. Thank you. Okay, I'll be sure to copy that and I'll paste that into the thingy and this thingy of the thingy of stop saying thingy. Lavender Lady has submitted that you need to look at opposing views and take them seriously. Actually, I actually do have a response to that, even though it's directed at you. Because I after listening to you, it does seem like that you look at things, but when I was a Christian, I would find ways to look at things and then rationalize what I'd seen. So I think that might be what's going on. So I don't think it's that you've never looked at anything and not taken it seriously. I think that you have looked at things. It's just like you had said before, with all the answers you got to your questions, none of them satisfied you. And it seems to me that there's some cognitive dissonance going on there.
No, and let me start how this all started, because I'll tell you, when I first got to Twitter in about 2014, somebody called Brent Monday, I never really see him that much anymore, but Brent Monday kept challenging me and saying I need to read atheist books, and it kind of scared me, and I thought, I don't want to read atheist books. What if I read them and my beliefs are shaken up in some way? And so I tried to stay away from them. And then this other guy, and I forget his name, but this other guy challenged me to read Bertrand Russell, and he said he'd read my best book, which I gave him as Mere Christianity, if I would read his best book, which was something by Bertrand Russell. So I read it and I thought, oh, these are the arguments. These aren't good at all. So I wrote one of my first blogs against Bertrand Russell. And
was that Mere Christianity?
Yeah, that was Mere Christianity was the book that I gave that person to read.
Why I'm not
why I'm not a Christian? Yeah.
I got the two switch. Yeah, I've got that book. Yeah.
But since I read Bertrand, I actually have read, and now I will say there are some atheists who are pretty decent in their arguments, going back to like Nietzsche and people like that. But there's some who are pretty weak. Like I read Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion. I thought it was terribly weak. I read Sam Harris's book, The Moral Landscape. I didn't think that even made sense. I read some other different books, things by Richard Carrier. I read a bunch of his blogs and stuff like that. And so, no, I have read other people's arguments, and I'm glad to get any more. I haven't yet read Lawrence Krauss's book, Nothing, I forget what it's called, something like The Universe from Nothing. I haven't yet read that one, and I haven't yet read anything by Christopher Hitchens. So I still have some on my plate to read at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good. It's good. Well, it's kind of the thing when I deconverted, because Christianity was like, well, that's the only God. There was no other God to lose, so I just went straight from Christian to skeptic. so it's interesting that it's like, well, what about all the other religions out there? Like, you'd have to study all those too. I mean, there's only so much time, but I think it is good to look at the quote opposing view quote, but there are other opposing views out there, obviously.
Yeah, no, there's a lot. And I'll tell you, I mean, I left Catholicism when I was in my 20s because I was very upset with some of the stuff that's going on still today in the church. And I was gone for about 20 years, non-Christian, not really following much Christianity at all. I was sort of, very, very weak Christian. And I started reading up on the Eastern faiths and on stuff by, what's that guy's name? Dalai Lama and people like that. And I thought that was really fascinating. And I thought for a while there, I had a feeling that was superior. But then God started being very active in my life, and I realized that those passive faiths were not real, not the ones that I should follow. So
Frustrated wanted to come in, and I said, we're kind of wrapping up here, I think, because we've been going, I don't know how long, but a while. But maybe he can set up a thing with you.
There's a lot of people in the chat that you have there that I have blocked because they haven't been very nice to me. They're still not being nice in the chat.
I wasn't very nice to you, but I'm not blocked yet. I've been trying, man. I'm trying.
No, you're actually, I don't have any problem. You've never said anything to me that I thought was...
At me. It was fun. I think you understand that I'm working on it.
No, I think you've been pretty decent. I try not to block anybody I've talked to on YouTube. If anyone wants to talk to me on YouTube, and if I blocked you, you know how to reach me. You can reach me here on YouTube if you want.
Is Frustrated Atheist one, or would you know?
I don't think so. I don't think I have him blocked. And there was another one there, Johnny Drive-By, I think I saw
Johnny
earlier.
Drive-By, he's great. That guy.
Greg I have blocked, and Lavender Lady I just blocked today. So.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Lavender was asking.
She said she didn't like me, so I was like, and I've been holding out for a while, and she kept saying she didn't like me, and I'm like, well, if you're going to keep saying you don't like me, why should I have conversations with you?
It doesn't matter. I would have just said, whether or not you like the person's irrelevant. What matters is the argument. So let's have a good argument. And, you don't have to like or not like someone to have a decent civil argument. I mean, it's up to you. Obviously, you can do whatever you want as far as that goes. But I think to forward discussion on any matter sometimes requires us to deal with people we don't like. So maybe you want to, what is it? Forgive how many times?
70 times 7.
70 times 7 or something like that. So I don't know.
Oh, I forgive all of those people. I just don't think it's wise to have them all on my timeline. That's all.
Well, you do put out some tweets that just, I mean, they're so bad. It's kind of the bump. Maybe it's Twitter that's at fault, but it's this bumper sticker sort of like, how do you explain this? Morality, you do the morality thing an awful lot. Like, you can't explain morals unless there's God. And it's like, what? How do you get from one to the other? There's no association causation there.
I have a lot of arguments on that. We probably don't have time to go down that whole path. But,
yeah, I know.
But no, I know. I do put a lot of tweets out on that because I firmly believe it. So that's why I put those tweets out. So I'm going to be on at 5:00. I'm actually going to go on into a debate with somebody who is taking. His name's John Singleton, and it's going to be on another person's channel. But he's taking the argument that the Christian believers can lose their opportunity to salvation, and I'm taking the argument that Christian believers cannot. So that's going to be going on at 5:00.
Oh man, does that mean I'm going to heaven even though I'm a skeptic?
I'm going to clarify exactly what I'm saying with that. So that's a universalist position that you have.
Look, I was a Christian, so if I'm once saved, always saved, I really am going to give God a hard time. So.
I think if you think about that one experience that you had where you were given a warning, I know you don't want to go down that path, but I think if you think about that, you might reconsider.
There's so many. The one thing about that is, and I don't like telling. There's a lot of other experiences or whatever things that it raises actually more questions if it was legitimate than it answers. Because why that one time? Why not all the other times that I was in trouble? Why not, give me a boost up when I could have really needed it? Why not send a message when my mom and I were homeless, walking down the sidewalk, and because the car had just died, and that was our only transportation, and we were pretty much hopeless at that point. And why not send a message to both of us in that time when we could have used some hope from God? And why not send the message before my mom tried to run out into the street to kill herself because of the despair that we were in that situation? Why didn't God speak to us then? No. See, the reason it's a story at all is because something happened. If there was no bully, there would be no story. If I felt that and nothing, and I went home, that's the end of the story. If I felt it and I went and nothing bad happened, that's the end of the story. They're only stories because we remember the hits and forget the misses. But the thing is, if God was going to communicate with me that one time, what kind of God is that?
Let me ask you something.
There's so many other times in my life that God should have communicated with me and didn't. So if that's the sort of God that there is, no, I'd rather okay, fine. I want nothing to do with it because it hasn't done it again, and it didn't do it all the other times when I could have really used it. So no, it raises too many questions.
Let me just ask
it's a naturalistic phenomenon. That's what happened. Yeah, wrap it up. Okay.
No, fan.
Oh, fan. I was like, you're saying wrap it up.
Hey, I'm sorry about your mom, by the way. If that's what happened, that's very sad.
She didn't do it. She tried, but I stopped her. But we were dirt poor, and that's one thing. There's so many other people that have far worse that could really use God's help, and it's not he, she, it, whatever isn't communicating in a meaningful way. Snuffy is sitting there saying, he didn't hear anything convincing about God's existence. Johnny has never believed in God his whole life and has no idea what that's like. So, if we're all screwed, if last poll I saw was like 33% of the world believes in Christianity, that means the rest of the world is all doomed to hell. That's not a very good amount of people that are, and even within that 33%, of course, not all of them are going to make it because depart from me, I knew you not. So God is really bad at saving people's souls, it seems to me. The Yahweh God doesn't exist. I know that for sure. The other gods maybe, but Yahweh, no.
Okay, well, we should probably wrap it up.
We'll wrap it up. Anyways,
we've been chatting a while.
So thanks for talking. I'm sure you'll set up other talks and go say whatever you want to wrap up, promote whatever you want. Then I'll say my thing, and that'll be that.
All right. Well, I want to say thank you for having me on, Dan. I think we got off a little bit to a rough start, but I think we were able to clean that up after a couple of minutes and have a pretty decent conversation. So appreciate the opportunity to come on your channel and chat with you. And I'm glad that there were a lot of people who showed up in the chat who were very interested to hear, especially what you had to say. I'm sure weren't quite as interested. I see more. I think I saw one Christian out of the whole group there. But anyway, I really do appreciate it, and thank you.
Okay, and S.J. Thompson's blog is in the description of this, so you can check that particular blog post out, and then the rest of her blog from here. I'll link to her channel, which I think, no, did I forget to do that? Probably. And if I remember to do all the other things I said I would do, I'll do those as well. And if I don't, oh well. But to wrap up, I'm pretty sure I didn't get empirical evidence, repeatable tests, and or a valid and sound argument. And unless and until we have one of those, we should be skeptical of the conclusions. Lobsters exist. That's all I know. I'm going to hit the button now. Goodbye. Here's the thing. Where's the button? There's the button. Don't hit